Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. In our next episode with Joe Geisner, we're going to talk more about lost Mormon documents. You know, there's some Parley Pratt diaries that are no longer extant. Joe's going to tell us how we know about those. We'll also talk about the Parley Pratt murders. You know, those occurred right before the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And Joe's going to talk about some diaries that he wishes we had in relation to Mountain Meadows. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out.
Okay, Parley Pratt. Now, this comes from Stephen Pratt. Steve is an amazing researcher. He is a descendant of Parley Pratt. He is the guy. He's the go-to guy when it comes. So I asked Steve, and he was kind enough to tell me this. He said, there's a 300-page manuscript of Parley Pratt history, autobiography. Now, that's because the autobiography of Parley P. Pratt was not written. I mean, there are bits and pieces, but it was his son that wrote, and I think John Taylor, I think helped. So
the idea is Parley's just telling them?
This is his real autobiography. It's 300-page manuscript, destroyed, gone, lost, disappeared, whatever. Wow. The Journal of Pratt of 1857, an interesting date. Why 1857? People don't know. That's when Pratt was murdered. That's also when he was dealing with stealing another man's wife. It was also
McLean.
Yeah, and Hector McLean murdered him. Vicious murder, a horrible murder actually. And so
from which he was acquitted.
Yeah, well, when you steal another man's wife, you don't usually have all-male jury, doesn't have much sympathy. But anyway, this is even more tragic in some ways. The letters of Parley Pratt, the current collection is 480 letters, and Steve is putting together a huge huge. Like the papers of Joe Smith, but this is the papers
is there a Parley Pratt?
Yeah, this is going to be. That's what he wants to do. Yeah, that's what he wants to do. Unfortunately, it's still years down the road. But the current collection is 480 letters out of 1,817 known letters to have existed. That's a lot of letters.
Yeah.
And Steve has scoured everything: family, church archives, everything, and 1,400 letters or 1,300 and some letters are gone, missing. Orson Pratt. Now this comes from a statement, an official statement actually, by Solomon Kimball. Now Solomon Kimball was Heber C. Kimball's and I think Valette's son, I'm pretty sure. So this is a statement from him. Some years ago, while the second edition of Parley Pratt's autobiography was being published in Salt Lake City, I happened to be in company with several members of Orson Pratt's family. And during our conversation referring to the published history of Parley Pratt, I asked the question why some of Orson Pratt's children did not undertake the compiling, writing, and publishing of a history of their father, Orson Pratt, who was so universally loved and known by the Latter-day Saints. I received no satisfactory answer for a long time, but after I had urged the matter repeatedly, one of the children of the late Orson Pratt finally admitted that Orson Pratt's record had been destroyed. He told me that when Orson Pratt lived in St. George along about the year 1864, his first wife, Sarah Pratt, took all the records out of the backyard and made a big bonfire. Well, her husband was on a mission. Now, you got to remember, Orson Pratt and Sarah had one crazy relationship. Joseph Smith wanted to marry Sarah. He then, after she refused, he said she was a whore. She worked in brothel. It was really not good. Orson Pratt wrote a letter to Brigham Young, said he was going to kill himself. So they had, So anyway,
that was because he thought that while
that she had
Orson
actually
was in-
slept with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Orson was on a mission in England, I believe
Right,
it was,
right.
and that Joseph had proposed to her.
Right. Right.
And he could have handled it.
Right, and it was yeah. So, so anyway, he concludes that's the reason why Orson Pratt has never had a biography published. John D. Lee's missing journals. Again, we're going back to that fun 1857 period.
Yes.
So
I
John,
thought this was the most interesting part of your presentation here.
well, now it's going to be a disappointment for you. But anyway, John D. Lee's missing journals are for funny September 1857.
So here's the funny thing, because I remember asking Richard Turley and Barbara Brown, did you find any evidence of missing information? And they said they didn't, at least that I remember. And so that I think that's why I was really paying attention to this.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. And what's also fun is Isaac Haight, John Klingensmith, and John Higbee all have missing journals during that time period too. So just a little interesting time period to have a bunch of journals missing. And following up on that, so you then got Isaac Hayes.
Maybe we should, because we're doing a little bit of inside baseball here.
Oh, okay.
Why is September of 1857 significant?
Yeah, that is when the Fancher Party was heading south from Salt Lake down to Mountain Meadows. They had not had a great experience coming through Utah. There was a lot of animosity and tensions were high. The Mormons, well, okay, first of all, we go back to Parley Pratt. Parley Pratt's been murdered in Arkansas. The Fancher Party's coincidentally from Arkansas. Not anything to do with Pratt's murder, and weren't even in Arkansas when Pratt was murdered. Matter of fact, McLean, Hector McLean's wife,
she was a trivia question, and I had no idea what it was.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember her first name. Eleanor McLean. Mormons did like a Pony Express with her. They got her in Arkansas, and then they rushed her to Utah. Guess who brings her into Salt Lake? Orrin Porter Rockwell.
Oh.
So Orrin Porter Rockwell brings her in to Salt Lake on his buckboard and runs her into Young's office. And Young and Wilford Woodruff, and I can't remember who else is there, all are interviewing her about what happened. And she tells a tale of blood. And again, the murder of Parley, I cannot ever emphasize enough, the murder of Parley Pratt was a horrible crime. It was.
So no, wait, let me back up here just 1 second, because I want to make sure I've got the timeline down. Because I thought you were going to go straight to Mountain Meadows, not to Pratt's murder. Because I'm trying to remember, she had left Arkansas and then just married Pratt without a divorce.
San Francisco. They
San
married.
Francisco.
They were both Hector and Eleanor McLean were in San Francisco. She converted to Mormonism in San Francisco. Pratt was the ecclesiastical leader of California and the Pacific Islands.
Oh, okay.
So he was the ecclesiastical, but the headquarters was San Francisco.
Okay. The headquarters of the mission.
It was more than even a mission. It was really he was the ecclesiastical leader.
Okay.
The buck stopped with him.
Okay.
The gold fields, everything, the buck stopped with him. And then the gold was then shipped to Utah.
Okay, so Hector and Eleanor are married couple.
Are married. She has two children.
Okay, 2 children. He didn't probably treat her very well, or I don't know.
Okay,
If that's right.
Yeah. Louisa Barnes Pratt, right? She's married to Addison Pratt. No relation to the Pratt.
Parley.
Yeah. Is it him or is it the other? Or is it her sister? One of them just got back from Tahiti. They had done a mission.
Because that's where Addison was served the mission.
And so they had just gotten back, and she actually served too. a mission there. She was, one of the first women missionaries, actually.
Okay.
And so she keeps a beautiful diary, both her and her sister. And so her diary doesn't say anything about, and they're like next door. And those homes in San Francisco at the time, or those apartments, were thin. Right. But the walls in the apartment complex were paper thin. She writes nothing about any abuse or anything.
Oh, okay.
So
that's not true.
There's a belief that was made up. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, so Eleanor and Hector are married in San Francisco. Eleanor joins the LDS Church. Parley Pratt basically converts
and
her.
Then he marries. He convinces Eleanor to marry him.
Okay.
In San Francisco.
San Francisco. So she just leaves Hector and doesn't.
Right, and then Hector takes the two children and goes back to New Orleans, I think, and gives the two children to her parents.
Okay.
And her parents are raising, and I think they file that she's abandoned the children because she's married Pratt. Okay. And so in an illegal. Right. Well, and I think they don't say marriage, they say adultery. She's living in adultery sin with Pratt. And so so they take over the parenting and the legal guardianship, I believe, of the children. And so then Pratt and she figure a plan out. I mean, it's complicated. I went through this with Lindsay on one of her podcasts. Okay. But it's very complicated. Yeah. And it's a very, very complicated story. But anyway, because they go to St. Louis, Pratt goes one way, Eleanor, and they secretly kidnap the children they leave in New Orleans, and they're heading back to St. Louis because they've got spies that'll get them back to Utah.
Okay, and so do they separate the children? Do you remember?
I don't remember that, but I remember McLean got the kids back. She lost the kids pretty quick. She was by herself, and so he gets the kids back and lets her go, and then McLean then hears that Pratt's around, and so McLean then gets his buddies, and that's when they start chasing. Okay. And that's when they murder. Well, McLean really murders.
And then basically he stabs him and he bleeds to death.
He shoots and stabs, yeah. It was gruesome. And Pratt lived for hours, almost a full day. Suffered almost a full day. And to make even things worse, which again I say, if you have friends like Brigham Young who needs enemies, Brigham Young said, well, he died the way he should have. He was a scoundrel for what he did.
Oh, for stealing.
Meaning for stealing it, which is ironic since Brigham Young stole Augusta Cobb from her husband in Boston. So anyway.
All right. Yeah. And do we remember where Pratt actually died? Location?
It's out of Van Buren, I believe. It's somewhere. It was basically on the road out, and he had been in prison. And the sheriff, actually, he knew McLean was in town with his buddies.
This is in Louisiana or where?
No, this is in Arkansas.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Van Buren. Okay. And I'm pretty sure. And I'm just hoping that I'm right. And so the guard or the sheriff, whoever it is, sneaks Pratt out of jail and gets him a horse and tries to get him out of town, but McLean had one of his buddies spying on the jail, and so he told McLean, so Pratt's really not very far ahead of them and trying to get as much distance, because if he can get to St. Louis, he's safe, because there were so many Mormons there that he could, if he could get there. And so, and they could have hidden him because they'd already hidden Eleanor, McLean, and Parley Pratt early on, and in this whole subterfuge to get the children, and so but he's just not very far. He's only a few minutes out of Van Buren, or a few miles, and they catch up with him, and McLean's shooting, and again, if I remember, I mean, this is Eleanor McLean's account, which is actually pretty good. The first account's pretty good, the one she gives to the reporters there in Van Buren, because they take her back to Van Buren to get her, in safety mainly, and then to get her escorted to the Mormons community to get her safe. And she talks about how there's holes, there was holes all over his clothes, and there were bullets that had gone through it. It's horrific. And they sat, I mean, Pratt was doing pretty good in getting away, but then they got, one of the bullets hit him enough to where it slowed him down, and that's when they were, and again, it wasn't, my understanding, the other guys just sort of stayed back because Pratt was helpless. He didn't have any defense for himself, and by that point, McLean just could do what he wanted, which was, gruesomely stab him with a knife. And and I don't, I read all those details, and
this is like May of 1857, if I remember. Does that sound about right?
No, it has to be later than that.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it has to be. It has to be like July, because she was they had to rush her back, which was also a weird thing, because they have to they hide her through Indian Territory in Oklahoma, or maybe I've got that reversed. Maybe Pratt and she were in Indian Territory. I think she and Pratt were in Indian Territory trying to sneak out. I think that's what they did. And there were Mormon missionaries in Indian Territory, which was Oklahoma. And they go through there because they figure nobody's going to be able to follow them. Oh, and McLean had the troops. He had troops from, I don't know if it was militia, from Louisiana, because she had broken the law, kidnapping her children. And so they were after too, but they backed off, I think, through Indian Territory or something like that. And so then McLean had really lost them, I think, and then just happened to stumble upon them in Van Buren, or he had heard rumors. There's some thoughts that maybe his Masonic connections might have, informed him. So I'm going back.
Wow.
You're making me work.
This is good. I mean, we weren't supposed to talk about this. I'm impressed.
Yeah. So, but anyway,
did this unprepared.
But yeah. So there's yeah. So anyway, but they have to sneak her back to Utah, and they rushed, because she gets there. Well, now I'm backtracking. You may be right. It may be me, because that's right. She gets there for July 24th celebration. That's what it was. She gets there the day before or something like that. And Brigham Young, then when he has everybody, then he announces and tells the bloody tale about Pratt. Because and they actually, I believe, it's a spectacle. And so I think Young puts Eleanor up, and she's just dramatic, and which she has every right. I mean, she saw her husband, well, not her husband, her lover. She saw her lover murdered by her husband, and Pratt's wives loved him. He neglected them. They lived in homes that were falling down around them. He never had any money. He was always on missions. I mean, it was just like, and they loved him. There's one account by, I mean, we're really getting off, but topic. But there's an account where Pratt is sitting there at a dinner table, And this guy is just offended because one of Pratt's wives, who is really, sits on his lap, is playing with his whiskers, and just almost having an orgy, in front of the table of people, and this guy's just offended. But Pratt's, again, that's what I'm saying. Parley Pratt's wives loved him. I don't think Brigham Young can say that,
No, not his wife. No. Especially wife number 19.
Yeah, right. Which, she had quite a reason to, Annalisa Webb was amazing. But anyway, that's a whole nother. But they loved him,
Yeah.
And Eleanor loved, she really did love him, I don't know. Hector probably could have been a bad guy. I don't know. Clearly his in-laws loved him because, they took the kids and, put the warrant out for Eleanor's arrest and everything. But yeah. And so anyway, so that created crazy mass hysteria. And Brigham Young was doing that for a reason. He wanted to stop all immigration between the United States and California.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, there's the rebellion, the Utah rebellion, where...
Well, that was the Utah rebellion to stop the immigration.
Yeah.
That's the Utah rebellion.
Because troops are coming unrelated to Pratt.
Yeah. And Young had spies all over the place. And so they knew that there was a group of troops meeting at Fort Leavenworth to come to Utah.
Right, to remove him as
governor because of a state of rebellion. Again, Mormons like to say it was about the marriage system. Had nothing to do with the marriage system. There was the Utah War had nothing to do. The troops coming into Utah was clearly because the state of Utah was in a state of rebellion because every single federal official that had been sent to Utah had been run out of the state or territory, run out of the territory.
And so Buchanan said, "I'm gonna."
He finally, right? Lincoln said, "I've got enough problems. I don't need to deal with Utah." Even though Utah was basically a southern state because it supported the Confederacy. Utah supported the Confederacy. It supported slavery. So, but Lincoln just said, "I don't need to deal with that.
Bigger fish.
I got way bigger." Johnson was a Southern sympathizer, so he didn't care. And so then, who is it after?
Grant. Ulysses
Grant. He was trying to do Reconstruction, and then is it Fillmore? I don't remember.
I think it is.
Is it? And he just he was actually more sympathetic with Young. So leaving, and Young was only supposed to serve 4 years anyway.
Right.
So he was, his term was way over. And so that was that, it was just like, no, I'm done. Buchanan, I'm done, And, people have been very critical of Buchanan, but I've talked to a few historians lately, and they say, Buchanan got a bad rap. He really was a good president. He really wasn't as bad as what a lot of people claim he was. So
I thought Will Bagley didn't like Buchanan.
Well, Bill McKinnon and Will Bagley both felt that Buchanan probably wasn't that great of a president. They say he was one of the worst.
Yeah.
I think we've had worse. But I've now talked to other nothing to do with Mormonism. Outside, they're presidential scholars, and they've said that Buchanan's not as bad as what history is like to portray.
Yeah. Well, good.
So
anyway, we can jump back. The
September 1857 missing journals. So all of that's going on, and the Fancher train, like I say, is coming from Arkansas. And there, this anger, this excitement. Brigham Young sent orders to the Southern bishops that he gave orders that you could kill people. Now, Brigham Young was specifically saying that you could kill these two guys that escaped from the penitentiary, because they're cattle thieves. And so he gives authority to the Southern bishops that they can kill these two guys.
Which two guys?
I can't remember Bates, and I can't remember their names now.
William
but they were two escaped convicts.
They're unrelated to the
Ventures. They're not. They're right, nothing to do with it. But my point is, Brigham Young gave authority to bishops to murder. Okay, somebody who steals a couple of cattle. He gave authority to murder those guys. The Mormons are so good at killing people that they messed up and they went to kill another group of people that had nothing to do with these two convicts. They went, oops, we shot the wrong guys. They didn't kill anybody in the camp, but they maimed them. Some of the guys were blind after, so the Mormons weren't real good at figuring out which party to shoot at. So
are you saying that these two convicts, the Mormons, got mixed up with the Fancher party?
No, with Tobin. It's Tobin. It's another party.
Oh,
it's another party that's heading to California. And
is this before or after the Fanchers?
This is before.
Okay.
Yeah, this is before. So but Brigham Young's now given permission, to murder. So you've got this. You got the Parish Porter murders going on, and is it Springville? I think it's Springville.
Okay.
You've got all this stuff going on, and so
the Fanchers are in the wrong place.
So the Fanchers are really in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're rich. They had all kinds of gold. They're rich ranchers, farmers
with a whole bunch of cows.
They got a bunch of cattle on top of the line cattle. Lots of good, nice clothes. So they've got all this stuff, and the tensions are high, and so they finally make it to Mountain Meadows, and it's like, whew, we've made it. California, here we come, kind of a thing. And that's when the Mormons dress up like Indians and go in and attack them that Monday morning, and then murder them all but the 17 children.
Right.
And by the way, the Mormons murdered a lot of children too. Just everybody likes to ignore that.
Not everybody, because Barbara made a big point about that.
Good. Because the Mormons did murder. People. People have. Now Barbara has really exposed a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, so those journals are missing, and that's.
So Klingon Smith, Lee, who else did you say?
Higby and Haight.
Okay. Yeah. Isaac Haight would be huge.
Yeah.
So they most likely burned them, destroyed them, because that was evidence that would incriminate them.
That's right. And Will Bagley would always talk about that, but it was actually, this comes from Mike Quinn for me in my research. This, Mike Quinn listed all these out. So, but Will I'm sure Will would have confirmed.
Yeah.
So.
They both passed away, isn't that sad?
It's actually heartbreaking. Yeah. So in conjunction though with the Mountain Meadows Massacre, Isaac Haight sent a message with James Haslam to Brigham Young. That's that speedy ride that Haslam made to get in, and so that note is missing. It's never been found. My understanding is that doing the Mountain Meadows Massacre book that Rick and Glenn and Ron did, and I'm sure that they did the same thing with Barbara and Rick's book, that they went through everything trying to find anything related. So if they had found this, that would have been a big deal.
Right.
So, but Will looked for it. They looked for it. Nobody's ever found. We do know, or at least we think we know, what was in the note, at least part of the note. And the only reason we think we know is because Haslam then gave testimony that he was subpoenaed to give testimony. And he said that so he said this is the message that was given, that the Indians had got the immigrants corralled at Mountain Meadows, and Lee wanted to know what should be done.
We think that was in the
That's what Haslam said under oath. Now, there is, you read that and we now know the Indians had nothing to do.
Right.
So, but
that seems like it's probably, if it was in the note, was false.
Yeah. And it wasn't uncommon for these people to write things that weren't accurate or weren't true for all kinds of reasons. There's correspondence, that we have that's coded, that, will say different things. Brigham Young was, Juanita Brooks is the first one that I know that picked it up, is she said that Brigham Young in his letters would wander all over and you had to sort of guess what he was trying to get at in his letters,
Do you think, this is into speculation, but if we had those journals, how would the history be different? Is that just an impossible question to answer?
Well, Will always said to me, and first of all, we don't have the victims' account. We've got some children's accounts from memory that were actually pretty good for being as little as they were. And the one woman was blind. Was it Dunn? I think she was blind. She was blinded during the massacre, and then the one little girl had her arm shot off, and so those kids went through trauma, but there's some real consistency in their statements and the evidence from history. So we do have those, a few, and not all of them because some of them were too little, but there's I don't know, half a dozen accounts I think by those victims. But again, they're not, but like Will said, that the Mormon perpetrators were always lying. John D. Lee was always lying. Hickman was always lying. Haight was always lying.
They were trying to save their own skin.
Right. And to wade through that is so difficult, because every single statement out of their mouth was self-serving. So Lee would say that Hickman did this, and then Hickman would say, well, Lee did that, or Klingensmith did that, or and so trying to find the truth in that. So if we had those journals, and particularly John D. Lee's were so good, he was so detailed. What did he write? I don't know I don't think John D. Lee felt guilt. I'm not sure. I think he was a psychopath, psychopath, but I do believe he was a psychopath for some other reasons. One is that he raped his wives, and he did it viciously. And rape is a vicious crime, but he really did. Would he, because for the most part, his diaries are really good. They're some of the best. Juanita Brooks picked that up quickly and just went nuts over his, unfortunately she also fell in love with John D. Lee as she wrote the biography, but his diaries are amazing. So yeah, if he had given good details, who knows?
Yeah.
But they did start blaming the Indians pretty early on too.
Yeah, definitely.
They did. They really did start. So yeah. So would he have done that? Don't know. It's so hard to know. Like you said, it's speculation.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed a conversation with Joe Geisner. Just a reminder, some of the stuff was cut out and it's only available to Patreon subscribers. So go to patreon.com/gospeltangents and you could hear the parts that we cut out. In our next conversation, we're going to talk more about Juanita Brooks and her lost diaries.
And yet her heart and experiences sought exceptions for her own life. Destroying the diary erased the historical record of her true feelings. What remained was the scattered elegy of a woman struggling in her new role as wife and mother in a blended family.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.